in Philadelphia sports, and we've listened throughout the day, and this involves both the Eagles and the Sixers right now. There's a line between being critical in Philadelphia sports, which is a natural place in which we live, and becoming a hater. The Eagles are in first place. The head coach has coached them to be out 7-2. The quarterback has played them into 7-2. And for 70% of the fans, that's just fine. But for 30%, which is not a small number, they seem to not just be critical when things don't go perfectly, but they go over that borderline into being a hater. And what I'm trying to figure out is, where exactly is that line? Now, on this show, and we're not perfect, no one is, what we attempt to do is, if we see something good, we say it. If we see something bad, we also say it. And that's kind of across the board. If the teams are doing something we like, we say the team did something we like. If the team's doing something that we don't like, we say, well, we don't like that. And as long as you do that equally, you can never go beyond the critic line into being a hater. The less the team does positive, the more critical you would be, but you're not being a hater. You're waiting for the team or the players to do something positive. When the number gets bigger than 30% of the people who are demonstrative haters when things go badly, and then demonstratively silent when things go well, like with these Eagles. There are certain people that were calling us pre-bye week or texting in pre-bye week, and I happen to know they say some of the same things. Thanks to the 4 seasons doing Sixers Outsiders, you start to recognize people's tells on social media. They'll text us with some of those same tells. Then when the team starts to win, they stop texting, but I see them on social media write me some of the same stuff during the game whenever anything goes poorly. So for you, Ricky Bo, being that you played pro sports in this city, and you've never run from critics.
No.
What is the borderline? What is that borderline where a person goes from critic, which we are all for, into being a hater?
I think here's what I think happens in the tale of a hater. I think you look at something, you don't like it right away, and you try to build that up as far as it can go. It's almost like building blocks. If you're building a building, you get the foundation, then you continue to build. They don't stop building. They always are looking for something to add on. And it's easy. Well, Nick Sirianni, it's not easy to find a building block every week. I don't care who you are. You can find some kind of a building block to put on that building. But I think because of the sole fact, and I'm putting this at Sirianni because this is who I think the people really dislike in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like they didn't fire him last year, so people were mad. Okay?
Right.
And they don't like to be proven wrong. Nick Sirianni is now proving them wrong. They are 7-2 right now. They are in good shape in the NFC. And when that happens, they even look harder for things to pile onto those building blocks. I think people just get an idea of where they want to put somebody, and they never let him off of that. They will never let him off of this. And you know what's going to happen? He's going to get a multi-year deal, and people are going to try to even build up higher.
And, that's interesting because we started with the Eagles with, right now, things are good. Now, we were critical of Nick Sirianni when he was yelling at the fans after the Browns game because it was inappropriate. We saw something bad. We called it out. We also was particularly critical of his coaching in the Jacksonville game where he overcoached and made a game that could have been a lot more comfortable, uncomfortable. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that he's 7-2 because he is the head coach. And outside of last season's collapse, that dude has done a lot of winning. Like whether we think he's weird, whether his press conferences stink, I'm not fighting people on any of that stuff. If you think it would be hard for him to coach you, I'm not arguing with any of that. But we do have to acknowledge, since he's arrived in Philadelphia, we know about that collapse. But more and more as time goes on, that collapse looks like a fluke. Like it was just one of those weird things that happen sometimes. We've seen it. It was the same thing for all those years in baseball with a 3-0 lead, and then all of a sudden the Red Sox do that to the Yankees. It was like the Red Sox were cursed for so long that they had to fight out of that curse in the most crazy way possible. So finally they beat the Cardinals and they win the World Series. Sometimes weird things happen. But if you look at his overall track record, there's a whole bunch of W's, a whole bunch of wins. Yet this week, and the morning show weren't hating. There are people who go too far the other way, and we'll get to those as well. They were talking about how, well, if you live the Nick Sirianni experience, you're going to be negative sometimes. Yes, and to me that's all fair as long as you're also positive sometimes. The same thing applies to Jalen Hurts. Now, you're right, Ricky. Not as many people dislike Hurts as Sirianni,
yeah.
But there are absolutely people who only respond to negative plays.
And think about this.
Jalen Hurts.
Think about this. He goes 220 yards. That was 2 weeks ago, I believe, with no interceptions and no whatever. And then they'll use that 220 yards against them and say he didn't get enough yardage,
even though the team won and all that.
And he'll overthrow one pass and say, "Well, he missed it. He missed a huge target down the field." Or like in his pass game, they'll use the fumble, they'll use the interception, and that will be their building blocks to build him up even higher. It's all to me about you don't want somebody to succeed that you think isn't good enough. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do.
In your own mind, there's times we'll look at a game and go, wow, this guy's just not going to be good enough.
Yep.
And we'll have a resume of why he's not good enough. Well, this is what they do. They will try to build up their resume as negative as they possibly can, as long as they possibly can. If he gets a 3-year deal from the Eagles after the season's over, and I'm talking about Nick, it has to stop. You can't keep those building blocks going. Because when does it stop at that point?
Well, that's interesting. And so 610-632-0975, and ultimately that brings us to the Eagles. Now, we have established, we're no longer going to debate on this program, that they are Super Bowl contenders. That is no longer an opinion. That is now a statement of fact on this show. If you would like to debate that, you can debate that on our social media because we appreciate the clicks. But we're not doing it, okay? It's not a debate. That doesn't mean they're going to win the Super Bowl. It means they're contenders to do so at 7-2. They just are. It's a statement of fact. Then we have the set of haters who don't even want to give credit to the football team when they're 7-2. They're looking for ways to discredit it. Now, when they were 2-2 before the bye, they were very boisterous with the criticism, which is fine. But when they win 5 straight games out of the bye, if you don't have the same energy to give praise as you do criticism, to me, that's when you go over the borderline, our word of the day, and become a hater. Because if you can't praise with the same way, then that's your problem. If a player has a good game, first of all, the better players have more good games. So Bryce Harper, Joel Embiid, who we'll get to in a minute, etc., they have more good games than bad. That's how you know they're great players, because they have a lot of good games. And if you want to kill Bryce Harper or Joel Embiid or somebody for a bad game, that's fine, as long as you have the same energy when they have a bunch of good games. To me, that's ultimately the borderline between critic and hater.
If you can't look at a game in 2 separate ways, you have a problem in the first place. And if you're looking at it at one way, that you just want a failure all the time, you're going to focus in on who you want to fail. And it's easy to, I'm just telling you, it's easy to pick out failures. More than it is sometimes picking out the reality of what's actually happening in the game for some people. I think looking at a game, obviously if Jalen Hurts is 20 for 24, 2 touchdown passes and 300 yards, that's easy to pick out. That's a great game. But if he's got numbers in between, what do I look at? I look at the score. What happened in the game?
Did they win?
Did they win? What did Saquon Barkley do behind him? Was he carrying the load?
Right.
I mean, you know what? I think we've gotten to such a point, and I'll stick this on Jalen right now, that everybody that watches the National Football League thinks the quarterback is everything. And when you think about it, think about all the MVPs that have been given out lately. Who do they go to?
Always the quarterback.
Always the quarterback now. It used to go to different guys. It used to go to running backs.
Now they get offensive player of the year goes to the running back.
Yeah.
But the MVP's going to a quarterback.
They should just say running back of the year or something. But, I mean, that's my whole point is that they have their main focus on one guy. But what you have to do is not only look at the statistics, but look at what he's doing. Look at his winning percentage in the National Football League.
Yeah.
That will stop you from hating in a second.
I completely agree. So, Savannah, before we move on to the Joel Embiid situation, your generation uses all kinds of wild terms for things.
Yeah.
If you say one regular thing like LeBron James, a great basketball player, you're glazing. What? He is a great player. That's not even a thing. And then you guys, your generation also has all these terms for hating and stuff like that too. So being that you're in a different generation than Ricky and I, what is your borderline between critic, which is always acceptable, and hater, which is never acceptable?
All right, so I've started to make a list of what I feel like is what a critical person does and what a hater does.
Okay.
So I have things for the hater, like doesn't acknowledge the good, typically winds up being dramatic, uses words like sucks, stinks, uses insults to try and get to the point, only pop out during the bad, stubborn, set in their belief, their bias shows, and they discredit anything that counters their point. Meanwhile, if you go to critical, it's usually evidence-based. They don't use insulting words. They'll be like, Jalen's not having a great game today, or, his pocket presence is a little off today. They will point things out, but they aren't dramatic. They're not using any negative words, and they want to see the player get better or are okay with being wrong.
Yeah.
They won't try and discredit them improving. They will take their improvement as evidence that they're getting better, whereas a hater would be like, okay, well, but he used to do this back then. So what if he resorts back to his old ways?
All right. No, hold on. That's a very good list. What we're going to do is we're going to have to get help. We're going to take that list that you wrote out, and we're going to publish this somewhere on our website for our rules for either being a hater or a critic. That way, people can sometimes check themselves. We all got to check themselves sometime. So we're going to give everybody like a glossary, all right, courtesy of Silvana that we're fully co-signing, okay? This will be the glossary for being a hater or a critic, okay? That's our hater alert.